They called it the Concordski, a white dart with a drooping nose, twin delta wings, and 4 roaring engines that promised to carry Soviet passengers at twice the speed of sound. To the outside world, it looked like the Soviet Union had beaten the West in one of the great technological races of the Cold War. But behind the polished propaganda, the Tu-144 was something very different. A rushed experiment, a money pit, and ultimately a machine that never really worked. The origins of this strange aircraft stretch back to the 1960s. Supersonic transport was the new obsession. Britain and France were teaming up to create Concorde. The Americans were working on their own giant supersonic jet, the Boeing 2707. Moscow couldn't be left out. For the Soviet leadership, prestige was the goal. It wasn't about building an efficient airliner. It was about proving that socialism could conquer the skies faster than capitalism. So in 1962, the Tupolev Design Bureau, already famous for bombers, was tasked with building the world's first supersonic passenger plane. The pressure was immense. Andrei Tupolev, by then an elderly legend of Soviet aviation, was placed in charge. Engineers worked around the clock, raiding scraps of intelligence and photographs of Concorde prototypes. Western observers accused the Soviets of outright espionage. The KGB certainly did its part. One engineer in Paris was caught trying to smuggle blueprints. But the reality is the Tu-144 was more than just a copy. It was bigger, heavier, and in some ways more radical. When it first lifted off on December 31st, 1968, 2 months before Concorde's maiden flight, the message was clear. The USSR had won. Pravda splashed it across the front pages. A sleek jet that would fly Moscow to Vladivostok in half the time. The world had entered the supersonic age. But almost immediately, the cracks began to show, literally. The Tu-144 was a beast of an aircraft, 65 meters long, 180 tons at takeoff, powered by 4 Kuznetsov NK-144 engines. Later models switched to Kolesov RD-3651S, which gave it a top speed of around Mach 2.15, actually faster than Concorde. But speed wasn't everything. Those engines guzzled fuel at astonishing rates, often twice as much per passenger as Concorde. On paper, the Tu-144 could fly over 6,000 kilometers. In reality, with passengers and baggage, it struggled to cover more than 3,000. That meant it couldn't even cross the Atlantic. Its range was so short that most planned routes were uneconomical before they even started. Still, the Soviets pushed ahead. Then came Paris, 1973. At the prestigious air show, in front of international cameras, a Tu-144 dived steeply, pulled up, and broke apart in mid-air. 6 crew members and 8 people on the ground were killed. To this day, theories abound. Was it pushed beyond its limits? Did it try to outshine Concorde in the skies? Or was it startled by a French Mirage fighter shadowing it for intelligence? Whatever the reason, the world saw the truth. This aircraft was dangerous. And yet, the USSR could not back down. 4 years later, in 1977, Aeroflot launched the first passenger flights. Moscow to Alma-Ata, modern-day Almaty. Tickets were cheap, but flying on the Tu-144 was no luxury. The cabin was deafening, like sitting inside an oil refinery. Air conditioning barely worked. At cruising speed, temperatures rose, leaving passengers sweating under chandeliers that looked borrowed from a Soviet train carriage. The ride was rough too. Unlike Concorde's smooth flight, the Tu-144 had a tendency to buffet and rattle, unnerving even the bravest travelers. In the end, it managed just 102 commercial flights. Most were half empty. Aeroflot crews hated working on it, passengers dreaded boarding it, and foreign governments refused to buy it. In 1978, another Tu-144 crashed during a test flight, killing 2 crew. That was the death sentence. By 1983, the entire fleet was grounded. Why did it fail? Part of the answer lies in engineering. The Tu-144's engines simply weren't efficient enough for passenger service. It burned so much kerosene that each flight ran at a loss. Noise levels exceeded most international regulations. Maintenance was a nightmare, with parts breaking far sooner than expected. And the rushed development meant reliability was never achieved. Concorde had its own issues, but it was carefully tested, refined, and built in collaboration between 2 wealthy Western nations. The Soviet Union tried to leapfrog with brute force, and the result was speed without sustainability. But economics mattered too. Even Concorde was only viable with heavy subsidies, flying elite routes like London-New York. The Soviet Union lacked the same market. Most citizens couldn't afford a regular plane ticket, let alone a supersonic one. And there was no equivalent of Wall Street bankers eager to shave 3 hours off their commute. The Tu-144 had no natural customers. By the late 1980s, the surviving aircraft were quietly mothballed. A few ended up in museums. One was leased to NASA in the 1990s for high-speed research, an ironic twist for an aircraft once meant to beat America. The rest sat rusting on airfields, monuments to a dream that never quite took off. The Tu-144 remains a fascinating contradiction. It was the fastest passenger plane ever built, but also the least practical. It was a symbol of Soviet ambition and of Soviet overreach. For a brief moment, it seemed to prove that Moscow could match and even outpace the West. But in the end, it showed something else entirely, that rushing technology for prestige can create more wreckage than progress. And so, the Tu-144 is remembered not for what it achieved, but for what it promised, a supersonic future that never really arrived.